Rain hammered the cracked pavement outside the diner. A black leather wallet sat abandoned by the curb, soaked and heavy. Most people walking the graveyard shift would have kicked it into the gutter. Chloe didn't. She picked it up, hoping for a stray 20 to cover her gas bill. Instead, she found a blank black card, a thick wad of hundreds, and a faded Polaroid of a burned-out house. Returning it was her first mistake. The black SUVs were just the receipt. The grease from the diner fryers always clung to Chloe's hair. It was a heavy, suffocating smell, one that hot water and cheap shampoo couldn't quite cut through. She was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles deep in the marrow, making every step feel like a negotiation with gravity. It was 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The streets of the city were slick with a persistent freezing drizzle. She found it by the bus stop. It wasn't a standard nylon bifold. It was thick, heavy leather dyed pitch black and stitched with a dark silver thread. It looked expensive. The kind of expensive that didn't scream for attention but quietly demanded it. Chloe stared at it for a long moment, the rain plastering her thin coat to her shoulders. Her checking account was currently sitting at negative $14. Her electricity was going to be shut off on Friday. She nudged it with the toe of her boot. It didn't move much. Heavy. Chloe crouched, glancing over her shoulder at the empty sodium-lit street, and scooped it up. She shoved it deep into her pocket and didn't take it out until she was triple-locked inside her cramped fourth-floor walk-up. She dumped it onto her chipped laminate kitchen counter. The leather was surprisingly dry on the inside. She flipped it open. No driver's license. No ID cards. Instead, there was a stack of cash. Hundreds. Crisp, perfectly aligned, untouched by the grime of regular circulation. Chloe's breath hitched. She didn't have to count it to know it was easily $5,000. Maybe more. Her hands shook as she thumbed through the bills. $5,000. It was a lifeline. It was rent for 6 months. It was a new mattress. It was a deep, uninterrupted sleep. But Chloe wasn't an optimist. She was a realist born from a lifetime of hard knocks. She knew that people who carried $5,000 in unmarked, untraceable cash did not just write it off as a bad day when they lost it. They looked for it. And when they found who took it, they didn't ask for apologies. She kept digging. Behind the cash was a heavy matte black credit card with no numbers, just a magnetic strip. And behind that, slipped into a tight leather pocket, was a photograph. It was a Polaroid. Faded, the colors bleeding at the edges. It showed a large, beautiful house completely engulfed in flames. No people, just the fire eating away at a home. Chloe swallowed hard. A cold rock of dread formed in her gut. She flipped the photo over. Scrawled in smeared black ink was an address, the Continental Club, 420 West 44th. She looked at the money. It whispered to her. It begged her to pay her bills, to eat something other than instant ramen, to fix the heater in her bedroom. She closed her eyes. No, she said aloud to the empty apartment. No free lunches. The next morning, Chloe didn't sleep. She drank 2 cups of bitter black tea, put her coat back on, and took the subway downtown. The Continental Club wasn't a nightclub. It was a discreet, unmarked building, tucked between a high-end art gallery and a boutique hotel. The brass handle on the heavy oak door was polished to a mirror shine. Chloe pulled the door open. The interior was dead quiet, smelling of cedar-expensive cigars and old money. A man in a tailored charcoal suit sat behind a minimalist marble desk. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over her damp coat, her scuffed boots, and her tired face. He didn't sneer, but the dismissal was immediate. "This is a private club, miss," he said, his voice smooth and cold. Chloe didn't say a word. She walked up to the marble desk, reached into her pocket, and placed the black leather wallet onto the cool stone. The man's eyes dropped to the wallet. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost comical. His posture snapped rigid. The polite dismissal vanished, replaced by an acute, vibrating panic. "I found it by the bus stop on 9th. Chloe said, her voice steady despite the hammer beating in her chest. "Everything is in there. I didn't take a dime." She turned around and walked out. "Wait!" The man called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Miss, wait. He'll want to. You need to wait." Chloe pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped back into the freezing rain. She practically ran to the subway station. She just wanted to wash her hands of it. She had survived by being invisible. She intended to keep it that way. 3 days passed. The persistent knot of anxiety in Chloe's stomach slowly began to unravel. Nobody kicked down her door. Nobody grabbed her in an alley. The electric company sent her a final notice which grounded her right back into her miserable, mundane reality. She was safe. She was broke, but she was safe. Then Thursday arrived. Chloe was wiping down the counter at the diner, her rag leaving streaks of watered-down sanitizer on the cheap Formica. The bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up, just mumbled a standard greeting. A man sat at the corner booth. The booth with the best view of the entire diner and the street outside. Chloe walked over with a menu and a coffee pot. He didn't belong here. He was wearing a dark navy suit that fit him too perfectly. No tie top button, undone thick shoulders, eyes like chips of flint. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at her name tag. "Just black coffee, Chloe," he said. His voice was a low rumble. She poured it. Her hands were steady, but the hair on the back of her neck stood up. She walked away. Over the next 4 hours of her shift, the man didn't take a single sip. He just sat there, watching her. Whenever she looked over, his gaze was fixed on her, unblinking heavy. When her shift ended at 2 a.m., the man stood up. He dropped a crisp $100 bill next to his full mug and walked out. Chloe told herself it was a coincidence. A creep. The city was full of them. She hurried the 6 blocks to her apartment, the icy wind biting through her jeans. When she turned onto her street, her steps faltered. Her neighborhood was a dumping ground for rusted sedans and stolen hatchbacks. But parked directly across from her building was a massive, pristine black Lincoln Navigator. Its windows were tinted so dark they looked like slabs of obsidian. As Chloe walked past it, the engine purred to life. A low, menacing growl in the quiet night. She didn't look at it. She kept her head down, crossed the street, and fumbled with her keys at the front door of her building. She got inside, locked the lobby door, and sprinted up the 4 flights of stairs. She slammed her apartment door shut, threw the deadbolt, fastened the chain, and backed away, breathing heavily. "You're being paranoid," she thought, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. "It's just a car." She went to the window and peeled back the edge of the cheap plastic blind. There wasn't just one Lincoln Navigator anymore. There were 3. They were parked in a perfect line, boxing in the street. Chloe backed away from the window. She sat on a sagging couch, staring at the locked door. The silence in the apartment was deafening. She waited for the sound of boots on the stairs. She waited for the door to be kicked off its hinges. Nothing happened. They didn't come that night, or the next day, but the cars didn't leave. When she left for work on Friday afternoon, one of the SUVs trailed her, staying exactly half a block behind. When she took the bus, a man in a dark jacket got on and sat 2 rows behind her, staring out the window. When she got to the diner, the same man in the navy suit from Thursday was sitting in the corner booth. They were suffocating her. They weren't hiding. They wanted her to know they were there. By Sunday evening, Chloe was running on empty. The exhaustion and fear were stripping her down to her raw nerves. She walked up the stairs to her apartment, her keys clutched between her knuckles like a makeshift weapon. She reached her landing. A man was standing in front of her door. He was huge, easily 6'4", built like a brick wall, wearing a tailored overcoat. He wasn't trying to break in. He was just waiting. Chloe froze at the top of the stairs. "Get away from my door." Her voice trembled, but she didn't step back. The man turned. His face was weathered, a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He offered a polite, surprisingly gentle nod. "Miss Hayes." "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "My name is Thomas," the man said softly. "Mr. Rossi would like to speak with you." Chloe gripped her keys tighter. "I don't know a Mr. Rossi. I don't want to speak to anyone. Tell him to call off his cars or I'm calling the cops." Thomas smiled. It was a sad, tired smile. "The police won't come to this address, Miss Hayes. Not tonight. Mr. Rossi simply wants to have a conversation. You did him a great service returning his property. He dislikes leaving debts unpaid." "There is no debt," Chloe said, her voice rising. "I dropped it off. It's done. In Mr. Rossi's world, a debt isn't settled until he says it is," Thomas replied. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the stairs. "Please, it is freezing in this hallway, and my employer is not a patient man. I promise you if we wanted to hurt you, you would not have made it up these stairs." It was the cold, unvarnished truth. Chloe looked at Thomas's massive hands. She looked at the dark stairwell behind her. She had no leverage. She had no exit. She swallowed the dry lump in her throat. "Fine." She walked down the stairs, Thomas trailing a respectful distance behind her. The door to the lead SUV opened as they approached. The interior was cavernous, smelling of rich leather and an expensive woody cologne. Chloe climbed in. The door shut with a heavy vacuum-sealed thud, cutting off the noise of the city completely. She was in their world now. The drive took 20 minutes. Chloe didn't ask where they were going. The tinted windows turned the bright, chaotic streets of the city into a muted, blurry movie playing on a screen. Thomas sat in the front passenger seat, staring straight ahead. The driver was a ghost, completely silent. The SUV finally pulled into a private underground parking garage. The concrete walls were spotless. Thomas opened her door and guided her toward a private elevator. He swiped a keycard, and they ascended in utter silence. The doors opened, and Chloe stepped out into a space that took her breath away. It was a restaurant, but it was entirely empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the lights glittering like crushed diamonds against the black sky. The tables were covered in crisp white linen, but all the chairs were pushed in. The only light came from a single chandelier hanging over a table in the very center of the room. A man sat at the table. Thomas stopped by the elevator. "Go ahead, Miss Hayes." Chloe forced her legs to move. Her boots squeaked faintly on the polished hardwood floor. As she got closer, she could see him clearly. Bastian Rossi didn't look like a monster. He didn't look like a cartoon gangster. He looked tired. He was in his late 30s, wearing a simple dark cashmere sweater pushed up to his forearms. He was nursing a glass of amber liquid, turning it slowly on the white tablecloth. His dark hair was slightly messy, falling over a face that was strikingly handsome, but carved with harsh, unforgiving lines. His jaw was clenched, his dark eyes fixed on the glass. He didn't look up as she approached. "Sit." The voice was quiet, but it possessed a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. Chloe pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. Bastian finally looked up. His eyes were a startling, piercing grey. They swept over her face, analyzing her in a microsecond. Between them on the table was the black leather wallet. "Chloe Hayes," Bastian said. It wasn't a question. 26, works double shifts at a diner on 4th, lives in a building that should have been condemned a decade ago, overdue on rent, utilities, and a mountain of medical debt left over from a mother who passed away 3 years ago. Chloe's chest tightened. She felt violated, stripped bare under the chandelier light. "Did you bring me here to read my biography?" Bastian's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something amusement perhaps flashed in his grey eyes. "I brought you here because I don't understand you, Chloe, and I don't like things I don't understand." He reached out and flipped the wallet open. He pulled out the stack of $100 bills. He dropped them on the table. "There is exactly $5,400 here." Bastian said, his voice flat. "I know this because I counted it before I lost it. I counted it again when my man at the club handed it to me." He leaned forward slightly. "Why didn't you take it? I don't steal," Chloe said. Bastian scoffed a dry, harsh sound. "Everyone steals, Chloe. When they are hungry enough, everyone steals. You are starving. You found untraceable cash on the street. You could have taken it, thrown the wallet in the river and walked away. Why didn't you?" Chloe looked at the money, then back up at Bastian. "Because I'm not stupid. People who carry that kind of cash don't forgive and forget. I took one look at that wallet and knew whoever owned it would gut me if I spent a dime of it. I returned it out of self-preservation. That's it." Silence stretched between them. Bastian stared at her, his jaw working slowly. He didn't seem angry. He seemed fascinated. Self-preservation. Bastian repeated softly. He reached into the wallet again. He bypassed the black credit card. His thick, calloused fingers pulled out the faded Polaroid photograph. He placed it on the table between them. The image of the burning house. "If self-preservation was your goal, Chloe," Bastian said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, "then you made a very grave mistake." Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs. "I just saw it. I didn't mean to pry. I was looking for an ID." "This photograph," Bastian said, tapping the edge of the Polaroid, "is the only thing in this world that matters to me. It is a reminder. It is a promise. No one outside of my inner circle knows it exists. No one." He leaned back in his chair, the shadows catching the sharp angles of his face. He looked at her, not as a waitress, but as a problem. A highly complicated puzzle piece that had fallen into his lap. "You brought it directly to one of my fronts," Bastian continued. "You bypassed my security. You walked in, handed over a king's ransom, proved you are entirely immune to greed, and walked out. You saw the one thing I keep hidden from my enemies. I'm not your enemy," Chloe said, her voice shaking now. "I'm just a nobody. Let me go back to being a nobody." Bastian picked up his glass and took a slow sip. He set it down gently. "That is the tragedy of this situation, Chloe," Bastian said softly. "You stopped being a nobody the second you picked up that wallet. Now you are a loose end." Chloe gripped the edges of the table, her knuckles turning white. "Are you going to kill me?" Bastian looked at her, his grey eyes softening for a fraction of a second, revealing a deeply buried, startling humanity. "No," Bastian said. "I am going to keep you." "Keep me." Chloe repeated the words, testing their weight. They felt like lead on her tongue. "I'm not a stray dog, Mr. Rossi. You can't just put a collar on me." Bastian didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply nodded to Thomas, who had been standing silently by the elevator banks. "I am not placing a collar on you, Chloe. I am placing a vault door between you and the people who want to tear my life apart," Bastian said, standing up. He smoothed the front of his cashmere sweater. "Tomas will take you to your new residence. Your debts are being cleared as we speak. Your lease is terminated. Whatever belongings you have that are worth keeping will be brought to you by tomorrow afternoon. You're kidnapping me. I am relocating you," Bastian corrected smoothly. "A kidnapping implies a ransom. I am the one paying for you." Chloe stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the heavy crystal glass at his perfectly composed face. But the survival instinct that had kept her alive in the city's underbelly kicked in. Screaming didn't work against men like Bastian Rossi. It only proved you were weak. "I have a job," she said, her voice tight, practical. You had a job, Bastian replied. The diner owner received a generous compensation for your sudden departure. He was thrilled. Before she could argue further, Thomas was beside her. His massive hand hovered just inches from her elbow, a polite suggestion with a mandatory enforcement. Chloe looked at Bastian one last time. He was already turning away, his attention shifting to a vibrating burner phone on the table. She was dismissed. The drive was short. They didn't leave the city. They went up. The penthouse was located in a sleek, anonymous high-rise in the financial district. When the private elevator chimed and the doors slid open, Chloe stepped into a space that made her chest ache. It was massive, walled with soundproof glass overlooking the Hudson River. The floors were heated, polished concrete. The furniture was minimalist expensive and completely devoid of warmth. It was a museum exhibit of a home. There is food in the refrigerator, Thomas said, stepping out behind her. He handed her a small, heavy key fob. This operates the elevator. However, it will only take you down to the lobby if Mr. Rossi authorizes it. The windows are reinforced. The doors lock automatically. Chloe looked at the fob in her palm. So it's a prison, just a nice one. Thomas sighed. It was the same tired sound he'd made in her filthy hallway. Miss Hayes, there are men in this city who would pull out your fingernails just to see if you knew what brand of watch Mr. Rossi wears. You saw his private property. You are safer here than anywhere else on Earth. And when he gets bored of me. Thomas didn't answer. He just stepped back into the elevator. The doors closed, leaving Chloe in absolute, suffocating silence. She spent the first 2 days waiting for the other shoe to drop. She paced the length of the penthouse until her heels blistered. She checked every window. Locked. She tried the elevator. It hummed, flashed red, and went nowhere. The refrigerator was stocked with fresh produce, prime cuts of meat, and imported water. She ate instant ramen she found in a back pantry out of sheer spite. On the third night, the elevator chimed. Chloe froze on the velvet sofa, pulling her knees to her chest. The doors parted. Bastian stepped in. He looked worse than he had at the restaurant. His suit jacket was missing. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and there were dark, rust-colored splatters across his left cuff. Blood. He didn't look at her. He walked straight to the kitchen island, poured 3 fingers of scotch from a decanter, and downed it in a single swallow. "Did you kill someone?" Chloe asked. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Bastian stopped. He turned slowly, leaning his hip against the marble counter. His grey eyes were hollow, exhausted. "Not personally. Not tonight. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I don't care how it makes you feel, Chloe." His voice was hoarse. He poured another glass. "I care that Sullivan's men are making aggressive moves on my southern ports. I care that my supply lines are being disrupted. I care that I have a headache that feels like a railroad spike behind my eyes." He walked over to the living area and collapsed into the armchair opposite the sofa. He stared at her. She stared back. She didn't shrink away from the blood on his cuff. "You haven't touched the food in the fridge." He noted his gaze dropping to the empty ramen cup on the coffee table. "I don't like owing people." Bastian laughed. It was a dark, scraping sound. "You owe me your life. A steak isn't going to tip the scales." A note on power. To Chloe, accepting the food meant accepting the cage. The hunger she felt wasn't just physical. It was a desperate clawing for control. "Let me out, Bastian." It was the first time she used his first name. His eyes snapped up to hers. The air in the room shifted, the exhaustion in his posture, vanishing, replaced by a sudden coiled tension. "No. I am useless to you." She pressed, leaning forward. "I don't know anything about you. I don't know who Sullivan is. I don't know what your ports do. I saw a picture of a burning house. That's it. It means nothing to me." Bastian set his glass down. The sharp clink echoed loudly. "It means everything to me. And right now you are a vulnerability. If Sullivan finds out you exist, if he finds out I broke my own protocols to spare the life of a waitress who saw something she shouldn't have, he will use you. He will torture you to get to me." "Why?" Chloe demanded, her frustration boiling over. "Why do you care? You don't know me. You could have killed me. It would have been easier." Bastian stared at her, the silence stretching tight between them. The city lights outside painted his face in stark shadows. "Because you put it back," he said quietly. Chloe frowned. "What? The money? The wallet?" Bastian looked away, staring out at the river. "In 38 years, I have never met a human being who held $5,000 untraceable dollars in their hand while starving and handed it back. You broke my understanding of the world, Chloe. I don't kill miracles, I lock them up." The routine shifted. Bastian started coming to the penthouse more often. He never stayed the night. He would arrive late, usually past midnight, smelling of cold wind tobacco, and occasionally the sharp, metallic tang of violence. He didn't interrogate her. He didn't treat her like a prisoner, but he didn't treat her like a guest either. They existed in a strange, tense orbit. He would sit at the kitchen island reviewing stacks of encrypted files on a tablet, while Chloe read books from his expansive library. It was a Tuesday exactly 2 weeks since the diner when the wall cracked. A severe thunderstorm had rolled in off the Atlantic. Lightning shattered the sky, turning the penthouse into a strobe-lit theater. The thunder was a physical blow against the reinforced glass. Bastian was sitting in his usual spot, but his tablet was off. He was staring at the heavy black wallet resting on the marble counter. Chloe got up from the sofa to get a glass of water. She walked past him, giving him a wide berth. As she reached for a glass, a massive crack of thunder rattled the floorboards. Bastian flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a slight tightening of his shoulders, a sharp intake of breath. But Chloe saw it. She turned the tap on the water running cold. "Storms bother you?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. He didn't answer immediately. He reached out and opened the wallet. He slid the faded Polaroid out and laid it flat on the counter. "The burning house. Fire bothers me," Bastian said softly. Chloe turned off the tap. She walked over, standing on the opposite side of the island, looking down at the photograph. The flames in the picture seemed to dance under the flashing lightning from the window. "Whose house was it?" she asked. "Mine." The word hung in the air, heavy and jagged. Bastian traced the edge of the Polaroid with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "I was 12. Bastian said, his voice stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "My father was a mid-level earner for the old families. He made a mistake. He skimmed off a shipment to pay for my mother's medical bills. The boss didn't appreciate the theft. He appreciated the disrespect even less." Chloe remained completely still. She didn't offer pity. Pity was a currency Bastian Rossi wouldn't accept. "They came at night," Bastian continued. "Locked the doors from the outside. Poured accelerant around the perimeter. I was small enough to fit through a basement window grate. My parents were not." Chloe looked from the photo to Bastian's face. The harsh lines around his mouth were tight. "I stood on the sidewalk across the street," he said. "I took this picture with a camera my father had bought me for my birthday the week prior. I took it so I would never ever forget what the world actually is." "And what is it?" Chloe asked quietly. Bastian looked up, his grey eyes locking onto hers. They were cold, absolute. "It is a transaction. You are either the one holding the match or the one locked inside the house. There is no middle ground. That's a sad way to live." "It is a way to survive!" He snapped, a sudden spark of anger flaring. "Look around you, Chloe. The men who burned my house are dead. I own the ground they were buried in. I built an empire on their ashes. I hold the matches now." "And yet," Chloe said, her voice steady, "you're terrified of the rain." Bastian froze. The anger in his eyes shifted into something volatile, dangerous. He stood up slowly, leaning across the marble island. He was massive, imposing a predator realizing its prey was not backing down. "Careful, Chloe." "Or what?" she challenged, the cynical, hardened part of her rising to the surface. She had spent her whole life shrinking away from angry men. She was done shrinking. "You'll lock me in a burning house, you already locked me in a glass box." Bastian stared at her. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the sharp planes of his face. He didn't hit her. He didn't yell. He let out a long, slow breath. The tension bled out of the room. "You have a sharp tongue for someone who eats instant noodles out of spite," he murmured. "It's a survival tactic," Chloe replied, not breaking eye contact. "We all have them." Bastian looked down at the Polaroid. With a swift, practiced motion, he slid it back into the wallet and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Sullivan has found out I'm holding someone," he said abruptly, changing the subject with whiplash speed. "He doesn't know who, but he knows I'm keeping a woman guarded by my best men. He thinks you are leverage." Chloe's stomach dropped. The reality of her situation, pushed away by the sterile luxury of the penthouse, came crashing back. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you are not to leave this floor under any circumstances," Bastian said. His tone was back to business. Cold, detached. "Thomas will be stationed inside the penthouse starting tomorrow. You are a target now, Chloe, not just a loose end." He turned and walked toward the elevator. "Bastian," she called out. He paused, looking over his shoulder. "If I'm a target," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the marble counter, "then give me a gun." Bastian Rossi actually smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying expression. "No, but I will teach you how to use a knife." The knife was solid steel, perfectly balanced, and terrifyingly sharp. "You're holding it like a kitchen spatula," Thomas observed from the corner of the room, his arms crossed over his massive chest. Chloe glared at him, her chest heaving. She was wearing leggings and a loose t-shirt drenched in sweat. The living room furniture had been pushed against the walls to create a makeshift sparring mat. Bastian stepped in front of her. He was wearing a dark grey t-shirt, revealing thick forearms corded with muscle and faded tattoos. "Thomas is right," Bastian said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual mocking lilt. "This was business. If you hold it like that, I don't even have to disarm you. You'll drop it the second you hit bone." "I don't plan on hitting bone," Chloe snapped, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I plan on slicing and running. In an ideal world, yes," Bastian said, stepping closer. "But my world is not ideal. If one of Sullivan's men gets his hands on you, he is going to be twice your size and high on adrenaline. Slashing won't stop him. You need to puncture." He reached out and covered her hand with his. His skin was hot, his grip like a vice. He adjusted her fingers, moving her thumb to the side of the handle, anchoring the blade. "Keep the blade flat," Bastian murmured, stepping into her space. His chest was inches from her back. She could feel the heat radiating off him. "If you thrust vertically, it can catch on the ribs. Horizontally, it slips between them." Chloe swallowed hard. The proximity was overwhelming. She could smell the sandalwood of his soap and the sharp tang of metal from the knife. "Now," Bastian said, stepping back. "Try again." He raised his hands, adopting a defensive posture. Chloe lunged forward, thrusting the knife toward his midsection. Bastian didn't even blink. He parried her wrist with his forearm, stepped into her guard, and kicked her feet out from under her. Chloe hit the padded mat, hard, the breath rushing out of her lungs. The knife clattered across the floor. Bastian stood over her, his chest rising and falling slowly. "You hesitated. You looked at my eyes before you moved. Never look at the eyes. Look at the center of the chest. The eyes will lie to you. The center of gravity never does. Chloe groaned, rolling onto her side. You know, for a guy trying to keep me alive, you're doing a great job beating the hell out of me. Pain is an excellent teacher, Bastian said, offering her a hand. She looked at his calloused hand for a long moment. She didn't want to take it. She wanted to stand up on her own, but her muscles were screaming, and the reality of her situation was absolute. She reached up, gripping his hand. He hauled her to her feet effortlessly. Sullivan's men are getting bold, Bastian said, walking over to pick up the training knife. He wiped it down with a towel. They hit one of my warehouses in Queens last night, burned it to the ground. Chloe stiffened at the word burned. She watched Bastian's face, looking for the flinch. There was none. Just a cold, calculating rage. Why are they doing this? Chloe asked. What does Sullivan want? He wants the city, Bastian said simply. He operates the northern boroughs. I operate the south. He believes my grip is slipping because I've been transitioning my businesses into legitimate enterprises. Real estate. Tech. He thinks going legal makes me soft. Does it? Bastian turned to look at her. No, it makes me invisible. Sullivan is a dinosaur. He still thinks power is measured in bodies on the street. I prefer boardrooms, but if he wants a war in the gutter, I will oblige him. He set the knife down on the counter. Pack a bag, only the essentials. Chloe felt a spike of panic. Why, where are we going? Sullivan bought out a member of my security detail. Bastian said, his voice dropping an octave. Thomas intercepted the wire transfer an hour ago. The location of this penthouse is compromised. Chloe looked at Thomas, who gave a grim nod. Are they coming here? She asked, her voice tight. They won't make it to this floor, Bastian assured her, grabbing his suit jacket from the back of a chair. But I don't take chances. We are moving to the estate in upstate New York. It's heavily fortified. You'll be safe there. Safe. Chloe scoffed bitterly, heading toward the bedroom. Right, from one cage to a bigger one. She didn't have much to pack. A few clothes, Bastian had provided a toothbrush and a paperback novel. When she returned to the living room, Bastian was loading a sleek black handgun. The mechanical clack of the slide racking echoed loudly in the quiet penthouse. He didn't hand it to her. He tucked it into the holster at his waist. Stay behind, Thomas, Bastian ordered. When the elevator doors open in the garage, do not walk out until I give the clear. Chloe nodded, her throat dry. The theoretical threat was suddenly very real. They took the private elevator down. The descent felt like it took an hour. The only sound was the hum of the cables and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of Thomas beside her. The elevator pinged. The doors slid open. The underground garage was dimly lit, the concrete pillars casting long, distorted shadows. 2 black SUVs were waiting, engines idling. Bastian stepped out first. His hand hovering near his waist, he scanned the perimeter. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow. Clear, he said softly. Thomas placed a hand on the small of Chloe's back, guiding her forward. They walked quickly toward the lead SUV. Chloe kept her head down, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were 10 feet from the car when the overhead lights suddenly flickered and died. The garage plunged into near-total darkness. The only light came from the red tail lights of the idling SUVs. Get down! Bastian roared. The sound of shattering glass followed instantly. A bullet tore through the rear window of the SUV inches from where Chloe had just been standing. The sharp, deafening crack of gunfire erupted from the shadows near the exit ramp. Chloe hit the concrete hard, scraping her palms. Thomas was over her in a second, his massive body acting as a human shield. Bastian didn't dive for cover. He drew his weapon in a fluid blur, firing 3 rapid shots into the darkness. The muzzle flashes illuminated his face, It was a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. The tired, calculating businessman was gone. The monster Sullivan was trying to wake up was fully awake. "Thomas, get her in the car!" Bastian shouted over the echoing gunfire. "Move!" Thomas hauled Chloe up by her jacket, practically throwing her into the back seat of the SUV. He climbed in after her, pulling the heavy armored door shut. Outside, Bastian was laying down, suppressing fire, moving steadily backward toward the vehicle. He didn't run. He moved with a terrifying mechanical precision. He reached the door, yanked it open, and slid into the front passenger seat. "Drive." Bastian ordered the driver. "Now." The SUV's tires shrieked against the concrete as it tore out of the parking space, bursting through the garage's exit gate and accelerating into the rainy city night. Chloe lay curled on the floorboards of the back seat, shaking violently. The smell of gun smoke filled the cabin, bitter and acidic. Bastian turned around in his seat, looking over the center console. His eyes found her in the dark. "Are you hit?" he demanded. Chloe shook her head slowly, unable to find her voice. Bastian exhaled a long breath. He didn't turn back around. He kept watching her, the adrenaline of the firefight slowly bleeding out of the confined space. "I told you," Bastian said quietly over the roar of the engine. "You are not a loose end anymore. I protect what is mine." Chloe looked up at him. She saw the blood on his knuckles, the gun in his hand, and the fierce, possessive gleam in his grey eyes. And for the first time since she found that wallet in the rain, she realized that Sullivan's men weren't the most dangerous thing in her life. Bastian Rossi was, and she was tethered to him. The drive upstate was a black, silent void. The adrenaline of the shootout burned off slowly, leaving behind a cold, shivering exhaustion that settled deep in Chloe's bones. The SUV tore through the heavy rain, the wipers slapping a frantic rhythm against the reinforced glass. Bastian didn't speak. He sat in the front passenger seat, a tablet glowing in his lap, his thumbs flying across the screen in a blur of encrypted commands. He was managing a war from the front seat of a speeding Lincoln. 3 hours later, they turned off the main highway onto a winding, unlit mountain road. The trees grew thick and closed their branches, scraping the sides of the vehicle like skeletal fingers. Finally, the headlights caught a massive iron gate, flanked by high stone walls. Men in tactical gear stepped out of the rain, their faces obscured by the harsh glare of floodlights. Bastian rolled down his window just enough to be seen. The gate swung open. This wasn't a country estate. It was a compound. The house itself was a sprawling structure of dark stone and timber built into the side of a rocky incline. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to withstand a siege. Thomas helped Chloe out of the SUV. Her legs felt like lead. The rain soaked her instantly, but she barely felt it. Bastian was already moving, flanked by 2 armed guards who had emerged from the front doors. "Take her to the east wing." Bastian ordered Thomas without breaking his stride. "Post Leo at the hallway door. No one goes in or out without my verbal authorization." "Wait," Chloe called out, her voice raspy. Bastian stopped. He turned on the wet stone steps, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "There is nothing to discuss tonight, Chloe. You are exhausted. You need to sleep." "Sleep?" She let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "People just shot at us. You killed a man in a parking garage." "I killed 2. Bastian corrected his voice, flat, devoid of ego or regret. "And if you want to stay alive, you will go inside, lock the door, and sleep." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and disappeared into the house. The east wing was a gilded tomb. The bedroom Thomas led her to was larger than her entire apartment building floor. It featured a massive 4-poster bed, dark mahogany furniture, and a stone fireplace that was already crackling with a warm, steady fire. The windows were narrow and barred with decorative but undeniable wrought iron. Chloe didn't take off her clothes. She didn't get into the bed. She sat in a heavy leather armchair facing the door, pulling her knees to her chest. She stared at the brass handle. Hours bled into one another. The storm outside raged on, rattling the window panes. Chloe's mind raced, replaying the muzzle flashes in the parking garage, the smell of the cordite, the terrifying mechanical ease with which Bastian had pulled the trigger. "I protect what is mine," the words echoed in her skull. She wasn't a person to him. She was an asset, a piece of property he had decided was worth keeping off the board. By 4 a.m., the silence in the room became unbearable. Chloe stood up. Her muscles ached, protesting every movement. She walked to the door and opened it. A young man in a dark suit was sitting in a chair down the hall. He stood up immediately, his hand drifting toward his jacket. "Leo, I need water," Chloe said, her voice steady. "There is bottled water in the mini-fridge in your room, miss." Leo replied politely. "I want ice." Leo hesitated. He looked at her, weighing the threat level of a 90-pound exhausted waitress against the wrath of his boss. "The kitchen is downstairs to the left. I have to escort you." "Fine." They walked in silence. The house was cavernous, smelling of wood smoke and old leather. As they passed a heavy oak door left slightly ajar, Chloe heard the low murmur of voices. She stopped. "Miss," Leo warned softly. Chloe ignored him. She pushed the door open slightly. It was a vast study. Maps and blueprints were spread across a massive mahogany desk. Bastian stood over them, one hand braced on the wood, the other holding a half-empty glass of amber liquid. Thomas was standing across from him, holding a satellite phone. "Sullivan is bleeding us in Brooklyn." Thomas was saying, his voice a low rumble. "He hit the docks. 3 containers gone. He's pushing all his chips to the center boss. He wants to force a sit-down on his terms." "He doesn't get a sit-down," Bastian said, his voice ragged. "He gets a grave. Mobilize the crews in the Bronx, hit his supply lines, burn the warehouses, burn all of it." "And the girl?" Thomas asked carefully. Bastian stopped. He stared at the map, his jaw clenching. "What about her?" "She is a liability here. Sullivan knows she exists. He doesn't know why you care, but he knows she's your weak point. If we are going to war, you cannot be distracted." Bastian drained his glass. He set it down with a heavy thud. "Get a jet ready at Teterboro tomorrow night. False passports, clean cash. Send her to the safe house in Geneva. Keep her there until Sullivan is a stain on the pavement." Chloe pushed the door wide open. Both men snapped their heads toward her. Bastian's eyes flared with sudden sharp anger, darting toward Leo, who stood helplessly in the hallway. "I told you to stay in your room!" Bastian snarled. "Geneva!" Chloe walked into the room. She wasn't shaking anymore. A cold, furious clarity had taken over. "You drag me into a parking garage shootout, lock me in a fortress, and now you're shipping me off to Switzerland like a piece of stolen luggage. Leave us!" Bastian ordered Thomas and Leo. The 2 men vanished silently, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. Bastian rounded the desk. He looked massive in the dim light of the study. The exhaustion on his face was etched deep, his eyes bloodshot. "It is not a negotiation, Chloe. You are leaving. It is the only way to guarantee your safety." "I never asked for your protection," she yelled, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "I just returned a damn wallet. You brought me into this. You put a target on my back, and now that it's inconvenient, you're packing me in a crate. I am trying to keep you breathing." Bastian stepped into her space, his towering frame forcing her to look up. His voice dropped to a vicious, vibrating whisper. "Sullivan doesn't want to kill you. He wants to peel your skin off while I listen on a phone call. He wants to break my mind before he breaks my empire. Geneva is a fortress. You will be safe, and you will be rich. I don't want your bloody money. Then what do you want?" Bastian demanded, his hands gripping her shoulders. His grip was bruising, desperate. "Tell me what you want, Chloe, because right now looking at you is the only thing keeping me from tearing this city apart with my bare hands." Chloe stared up at him. The mask of the cold, untouchable mob boss was gone. He was unraveling, pulled apart by the ghosts of his past and the violence of his present. She realized with a sickening jolt that she wasn't just a loose end. She was his anchor. She was the one thing in his life that wasn't transactional, that couldn't be bought or intimidated. "I want to stop running," Chloe said quietly. She didn't pull away from his grip. "If I go to Geneva, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for a man in a dark suit to knock on my door. I won't live like that." Bastian's thumbs stroked the fabric of her shirt, a subconscious grounding movement. "You can't stay here. The violence, it is going to consume everything. I am a burning house, Chloe. Do not lock yourself inside with me." "I'm already inside," she whispered. Bastian closed his eyes. A shudder ran through his massive frame. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was the desperate clinging of a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. He smelled of rain-scotch and gunpowder. "Then heaven help us both," he murmured against her temple. The heavy oak door suddenly slammed open. Thomas stood in the frame. His face was entirely devoid of color. The satellite phone was crushed in his massive fist. "They're here," Thomas said. The power cut instantly. The sprawling estate plunged into absolute blackness. A heartbeat later, the backup generators kicked in, bathing the hallways in a sickly dim red emergency light. "Tracker," Bastian said. His voice was a razor blade. He released Chloe, his hand dropping instantly to the holster at his waist. The gun was out in a fraction of a second. They must have slapped a magnetic beacon on the undercarriage of the SUV during the garage shootout. "Proximity alarms are triggered at the tree line," Thomas reported, stepping into the room. He handed a heavy matte black shotgun to Bastian. "Motion sensors indicate at least 20 men. They bypassed the main gate. They came up through the mountain ridge." Bastian racked the shotgun with a deafening clack. "They want a slaughter. Let's give it to them." He turned to Thomas. "Take her to the basement vault. Lock the reinforced door. Do not open it unless you hear my voice." "No," Chloe said, grabbing Bastian's forearm. "Don't leave me in a box." Bastian looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The red emergency lights cast harsh demonic shadows across his features. "You want to survive, Chloe? You do exactly what I say." Thomas' move gunfire erupted outside. It wasn't the sharp pop of handguns. It was the heavy rhythmic thud of automatic assault rifles. The sound tore through the thick timber walls, followed by the shattering of glass in the west wing. Thomas grabbed Chloe by the arm and hauled her out of the study. They sprinted down the red-lit hallway. The house was alive with chaos. Men in tactical gear were running past them, barking orders over radios. Dust fell from the ceiling as bullets chewed through the stone exterior. They reached a narrow staircase hidden behind a heavy tapestry. Thomas shoved her down the steps. "Keep moving. Don't stop." Chloe stumbled, catching herself on the stone wall. The air down here was cold and smelled of damp earth. At the bottom of the stairs was a long, narrow corridor leading to a massive steel vault door. "Almost there," Thomas grunted, pushing her forward. Above them, an explosion shook the foundation. The lights flickered violently. Dust rained down in thick sheets. They were 20 feet from the vault when a man stepped out from a side wine cellar. He was wearing tactical gear, a black balaclava obscuring his face. He held a suppressed submachine gun. He saw Thomas and raised the weapon instantly. Thomas didn't hesitate. He shoved Chloe violently to the ground against the wall and threw his massive body forward. The suppressed weapon coughed. "Thwip, thwip, thwip," Thomas roared. Blood sprayed across the stone wall as bullets tore into his shoulder and thigh. But his momentum carried him forward. He slammed into the gunman, pinning him against the wine racks. Bottles shattered, raining glass and dark red liquid over them. "Run!" Thomas choked out, wrestling with the man for the rifle. Chloe scrambled backward on her hands and knees. She looked at the steel vault door. It was 10 feet away. But she couldn't leave him. Thomas had stood between her and a bullet twice in one night. She looked around frantically. Her eyes locked on the shattered remnants of a wine bottle on the floor. She didn't have the training knife. But Bastian's voice echoed in her head with crystal clarity. Keep the blade flat. Horizontal. Don't look at the eyes. Look at the center of gravity. Chloe grabbed a jagged shard of thick green glass. It sliced into her palm, warm blood instantly slicking her skin. She didn't drop it. The gunman kicked Thomas hard in his wounded thigh. Thomas collapsed with a sickening groan, his grip failing. The gunman raised the rifle, pointing it down at Thomas's head. Chloe didn't scream. She didn't announce herself. She moved with the silent, desperate speed of an animal backed into a corner. She lunged. She slammed into the gunman's back. She wrapped her left arm around his neck, pulling him backward, and drove the jagged glass shard into the side of his neck, right below the jawline. She drove it in flat, horizontal. The man stiffened rigidly. The rifle clattered to the stone floor. He let out a wet, gurgling sound and thrashed backward, slamming Chloe against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she didn't let go. She twisted the glass, her hands slick with a terrifying mixture of her own blood and his. The man's knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor, dragging Chloe down with him. He twitched twice, and then lay entirely still. Chloe rolled off him, gasping for air. Her hands were dyed crimson. She stared at the unblinking eyes of the dead man through the holes of his balaclava. Her stomach heaved violently. She turned away and threw up on the stone floor. "Miss Hayes," a weak voice rasped. Chloe wiped her mouth with a shaking, bloody hand and crawled over to Thomas. He was leaning against the wall, clutching his shoulder. His breathing was shallow, his face grey. "I'm here," she whispered, tearing the hem of her shirt and pressing it against his shoulder wound. Thomas looked at the dead man, then back at Chloe. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "Horizontal. He told me to keep it flat." Chloe sobbed, the adrenaline crashing down on her, leaving nothing but sheer terror. Footsteps pounded down the stone stairs. Heavy, fast. Chloe grabbed the dropped rifle. It was impossibly heavy. She aimed it at the dark stairwell, her arms shaking violently. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Bastian. His face was streaked with soot and blood. The shotgun in his hand was smoking. He stopped dead when he saw the scene. The dead man in tactical gear. Thomas bleeding against the wall, and Chloe kneeling in a pool of blood holding an assault rifle aimed at his chest. "Chloe," Bastian said softly. He dropped the shotgun. He raised his empty hands, stepping into the red emergency light. "It's me. Put it down." She stared at him, her eyes wide and unseeing. The trauma was a thick fog blinding her. "Chloe." He stepped closer, sinking to his knees right in front of the barrel. He reached out and gently wrapped his large, warm hands over hers. "Give it to me. It's over. You're safe." He pulled the rifle from her stiff fingers and tossed it aside. Chloe collapsed forward. Bastian caught her, pulling her tight against his chest. She buried her face in his neck, screaming a raw, guttural sound of pure grief for the piece of her soul she had just butchered on the basement floor. Bastian held her, his hand stroking her blood-matted hair. He looked over her shoulder at Thomas. "Sullivan," Thomas asked weakly. "Dead?" Bastian replied, his voice a hollow metallic rasp. "They pushed into the study. I burned them out. The strike teams in the city hit his strongholds 10 minutes ago. The war is over." Bastian looked down at the dead man, then at the blood coating Chloe's hands. He tightened his grip on her, his eyes turning hard and absolute in the red light. She had crossed the line. There was no going back to the diner now. The morning sun broke over the mountain ridge, pale and cold. The heavy rain had washed the blood from the stone steps of the front entrance, but the air still smelled of cordite and wet ash. The estate was a hive of quiet, methodical activity. Men in heavy boots carried black plastic bags out of the house, loading them into unmarked vans. The shattered glass was swept up. The bullet holes were ignored for now. The machine of Bastian Rossi's empire was cleaning up its mess. Chloe sat at the massive dining room table. She wore a clean, oversized grey sweater and sweatpants someone had found for her. Her left hand was heavily bandaged where the glass had cut her. She stared at a cup of black coffee on the table. It had gone cold an hour ago. The door opened. Bastian walked in. He had showered. He was wearing dark slacks and a black button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up. He looked composed. The manic violence of the night before was locked away behind a flawless, impenetrable mask. He sat down across from her. "Thomas is in surgery," Bastian said quietly. "My private physician is attending to him. The bullets missed the arteries. He will have a limp, but he will live. He asked me to thank you." Chloe didn't look up. "He saved my life." "You saved his," Bastian countered. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The reality of the morning light was harsher than the darkness of the basement. In the dark, she had acted on pure instinct. In the light, she had to live with the memory of the wet, tearing sound the glass made. Bastian reached into his pocket. He placed a thick, pristine white envelope on the table. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested against her cold coffee cup. "There are new identification papers in there," Bastian said. His voice was clinical, detached. "A passport, a driver's license, bank account details holding $5 million routed through untraceable shell corporations, a deed to a villa in Lake Como, fully staffed and guarded by men who answer only to me." Chloe finally looked up. Her eyes were hollow. "Sullivan is dead." Bastian continued, meeting her gaze steadily. "His lieutenants are dead. The families have recognized my claim over the northern boroughs. The threat against you is eliminated." "So why the envelope?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Because the debt is paid," Bastian said softly. "You returned my property. You saved my closest friend. You took a life for this family. The ledger is closed, Chloe. You are free." He stood up. He buttoned his cuffs, preparing to walk out of the room, preparing to walk back into his world of boardroom violence and shadows. "Free to do what?" Chloe asked. Bastian stopped. He looked back at her. "Whatever you want. You never have to look over your shoulder again. You never have to worry about the rent or the cold or angry men in dark suits. You think a villa in Italy erases what happened down there." She pointed a bandaged hand toward the floor towards the basement. "You think I can just sit by a lake and pretend I don't know what it feels like to kill a man? You survived." Bastian said, his voice tightening. "That is all that matters. I am not a stray dog you can just release into the wild because you feel guilty, Bastian." Chloe stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. She walked around the table, stopping inches from him. She looked at the harsh, handsome lines of his face. She saw the exhaustion hidden behind his eyes. She saw the monster who had burned men alive in his study to protect her. "You told me the world is a burning house," Chloe said quietly. "You told me you are either holding the match or you are locked inside." Bastian's jaw clenched. "I told you not to lock yourself inside with me. I already did." Chloe reached out, pressing her bandaged hand flat against the center of his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, steady rhythm. "I killed a man for you. I crossed the line. There is no normal life waiting for me out there. There is only this." Bastian looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The mask broke. The cold, calculating boss vanished, replaced by a man who was deeply, terrifyingly obsessed. "If you stay," Bastian whispered, his voice trembling with a suppressed, violent need. "There is no leaving. Ever. You will be my weakness, and I will be your cage. I will build an empire of ash just to keep you safe, but you will never truly be clean again." "I don't want to be clean," Chloe said. The cynicism of her past met the dark reality of her present, forging something entirely unbreakable. "I want to hold the match." Bastian let out a ragged breath. He reached up his large hand, cupping her face, his thumb gently tracing the bruise on her cheekbone. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "Then let it burn," he whispered. He didn't kiss her. It wasn't that kind of romance. It was a binding contract signed in blood and sealed in the quiet aftermath of a slaughter. The black leather wallet sitting in his pocket had brought her to his door, but it was the shared darkness that would keep her there forever. Outside, the sun fully crested the mountain, casting long, sharp shadows across the iron fortress. The diner on 4th Street was a lifetime away. Chloe Hayes was dead. The Queen of Bastian Rossi's empire had just opened her eyes. If you enjoyed this dark, gritty romance and want to see more grounded stories where the stakes are life, death, and absolute loyalty, make sure to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. See you in the next one.